While the sun dipped low over the dusty African village, Amina moved quietly in the small mud-walled kitchen, preparing her husband Musa's evening meal. The air carried the scent of firewood and simmering stew, a familiar comfort in their home. On the top wooden shelf sat a neat row of glass jars, spices, herbs, dried leaves, all neatly labeled in her grandmother's delicate handwriting. Amina had grown up watching her grandmother use them for both food and medicine, always reminding her, some heal, some harm. Always know the difference. But today her mind wasn't steady. Musa had returned from the fields looking tired, and their earlier arguments still weighed heavy on her. She wanted to make peace, to cook his favorite meal as a silent apology. Without thinking too deeply, she reached for the jar of greenish powder her grandmother had once told her to avoid unless treating infected wounds. Its label had faded, and in the dim evening light, it looked no different from the crushed spinach powder she often used for flavor. The stew bubbled gently as she sprinkled a spoonful into the pot. The scent changed slightly, more bitter, but Amina told herself it was just the firewood smoke. She stirred slowly, humming an old lullaby, hoping the warm meal would erase the tension between them. Musa entered the room, his smile faint but forgiving. "It smells good," he said, sitting cross-legged on the mat. She served him, watching closely as he took the first bite. His expression softened, and for a moment, Amina felt relief. They ate together, talking about small things, the goats, the neighbor's wedding, the weather. Later that night, under the oil lamp's flickering light, Musa began to cough. At first it seemed harmless, but soon he clutched his stomach, his face pale and sweaty. Panic rose in Amina's chest. She fetched water, held his hand, and asked if he had eaten something strange that day. Through shallow breaths, Musa looked into her tear-filled eyes. "It's all right, Amina," he whispered. "I forgive you." Her heart dropped. "Forgive me? For what?" she asked, but his voice was fading. She remembered her grandmother's warning, the dusty green powder, the slightly bitter smell, and the truth struck her like lightning. She had fed him poison. By the time the village healer arrived, it was too late. Musa lay still, the oil lamp's flame trembling as if it too grieved. Amina sat beside him until morning, the jar of poisonous herbs still on the kitchen shelf, untouched yet forever burned into her memory. In the quiet dawn, the village awoke to the sound of mourning. Amina's life had changed in one careless moment, and his last words, gentle, undeserved forgiveness, would haunt her until her own final breath. The wind carried the smell of rain into the small mud brick house as Zainab crouched near the cooking fire, her eyes catching sight of a folded paper on the wooden table. It was addressed to her husband, Karim, the bold letters written in the hurried hand of the village messenger. She turned it over, curiosity pulling her closer. For weeks, whispers about Karim had drifted through the marketplace. Rumors of old grudges, unpaid debts, and men who didn't forgive easily. Zainab had dismissed them all as petty talk. She believed her husband's kind heart and honest hands would protect him. But this letter, something about it unsettled her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The words inside were sharp, urgent. "Do not go to the Eastern market tomorrow. They are waiting for you. Come to me first. Idris." Her first reaction was anger. More gossip. More paranoia. Idris was an old friend who had become too fearful since the disputes between the traders began. Karim didn't need this nonsense filling his head. He had enough to worry about, feeding the goats, fixing the fence, tending their small plot of land. So, without thinking, Zainab tossed the letter into the fire. The flames curled around it, the ink fading into ash, until only the faint scent of burning paper lingered in the air. She told herself it was for the best. She didn't want to trouble him with baseless warnings. That night, Karim came home late from visiting his brother, his smile warm, his words gentle. They spoke about the coming harvest, about how the rains might help the maize grow tall this season. Zainab said nothing about the letter. The next morning he left for the Eastern market as usual, whistling softly, his bag slung over his shoulder. Zainab watched him disappear down the dusty path, never imagining it would be the last time she saw him walking strong and upright. Hours later, shouts echoed through the village. Men were running, women crying. Zainab's heart pounded as she saw two neighbors carrying Karim between them. His shirt was torn, blood staining his chest. His face was pale, his breath shallow. She fell to her knees beside him. "Karim, who did this? What happened?" His eyes, half-lidded, found hers. With a weak smile he whispered, "It's all right. I forgive you." Her breath caught. "Forgive me? Why?" He tried to speak, but the words dissolved into a cough. His hand, still warm, slipped from hers. The healer's voice was distant, drowned beneath the roar in her ears. She understood without anyone telling her, the letter had been true. When they carried him away, Zainab stayed by the cold ashes of her cooking fire, her gaze fixed on the spot where she had burned the warning. The same smoke she had thought would keep danger away had, instead, stolen the man she loved. From that day on, every time the wind brought the scent of rain, it also brought the memory of Karim's last breath and the soft, undeserved mercy in his final words. The morning sun had barely risen when Miriam stood at the doorway, watching her husband, Yarrow, tie his sandals. He was heading to the neighboring town to sell their harvested groundnuts, and the path he usually took wound through the long, dusty road beside the river. It was safe but slow. Miriam remembered hearing from her cousin about a narrow track cutting through the thicket, half the distance used by hunters and traders who wanted to avoid the crowded market road. It was quiet, shaded by tall trees, and she had walked part of it once to fetch firewood. She'd never heard of any trouble there. "You'll get home before sunset if you take the shortcut," she told him, pointing toward the grove in the east. Yarrow hesitated. "The one behind the old baobab tree?" "Yes," she said with certainty. "It's quicker and you can rest before evening prayers." He smiled, kissed her forehead and set off, the sack of groundnuts slung over his shoulder. Miriam watched him disappear into the green shadows, feeling pleased she had helped him save time. The day passed with the rhythm of chores, fetching water, sweeping the yard, tending to the goats. But as the sun dipped lower, her chest tightened. The shortcut should have brought him home hours ago. She scanned the horizon for his figure, listening for his familiar whistle. Nothing. By nightfall, lanterns flickered through the village as men gathered in whispers. 2 travelers from the next town had just arrived with grim news. A robbery had taken place on the shortcut road. Armed men had attacked anyone carrying goods, leaving them battered and stripped. Miriam's stomach knotted. Her feet moved before her mind caught up, carrying her toward the search party forming at the edge of the village. The men lit torches, their flames swaying in the cool night wind. They found Yarrow near the old baobab lying in the dirt. His clothes were torn, his sack gone. Blood streaked his face, his breathing shallow. Miriam fell beside him, tears spilling as she tried to lift his head. "I'm here, Yarrow. I'm here," she whispered. His eyes fluttered open, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's all right. I forgive you." Her heart cracked. "Forgive me?" The words caught in her throat as she realized what he meant. Her shortcut. Her suggestion. Her faith in a road she didn't really know. By the time the healer reached them, Yarrow's chest had stilled. The torches cast long, trembling shadows on the road that had stolen him. From then on, Miriam could never pass the old baobab without hearing his last words and seeing that faint smile, a mercy she... The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the village paths into narrow streams of brown water. Inside the small, dimly lit hut, Fatima bent over her husband Hassan, who lay on a reed mat shivering beneath a thin blanket. His skin burned with fever and every breath came with a low, painful groan. She had already been to the healer 2 days earlier, returning with a pouch of dried leaves to boil into a bitter tea. It had helped for a while, but this morning his condition had worsened. The cough was deeper, his lips cracked, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. Panic drove her into action. She rummaged through the woven basket that held her grandmother's old remedies, bundles of roots, jars of powder, bottles of cloudy liquid. Fatima's hands moved quickly, almost too quickly. She recognized the reddish powder the healer had given her and set it aside, then pulled out another bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. Her grandmother had used these green leaves for body aches. If both helped in different ways, surely combining them would work faster. She boiled water in a small clay pot, tossing in the leaves and stirring in the powder until the steam rose in thick curls. The smell was sharp, earthy, almost metallic, but she told herself medicine rarely smelled pleasant. Time was running out and she just wanted to see Hassan sit up again. When she brought the cup to him, Hassan tried to wave it away, but she pressed it to his lips. "Please drink. It will make you better." He swallowed slowly, grimacing at the taste. She smiled faintly, relief washing over her as he finished the cup. For a moment, nothing happened, just the sound of rain on the roof and the flicker of the small oil lamp. Then his breathing quickened. He coughed harshly, clutching his chest. Fatima froze. "Hassan? Tell me what's wrong." His eyes darted toward her, a flicker of fear in them. He tried to speak, but the words dissolved into gasps. Fatima's mind flashed back to her grandmother's warnings. Some herbs heal on their own but turn deadly when mixed. She had never imagined the green leaves and the reddish powder could be one of those dangerous combinations. She ran to fetch water, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the jug. Hassan's body trembled, his breaths becoming shallower, weaker. She knelt beside him, trying to lift his head. "It's all right," he whispered through labored breaths. "I forgive you." The words struck her harder than any storm. She gripped his hand, her tears falling onto his fevered skin. "No, no, stay with me, Hassan. Please." But his gaze was already distant, the strength leaving his fingers as the rain outside softened into a mournful drizzle. When the healer arrived later, he took one look at the empty cup and the pot on the fire. His eyes darkened with understanding, but he said nothing. Fatima didn't need him to explain. From that day on, the sight of those herbs, once a symbol of healing, would forever taste like guilt on her tongue, a reminder of the moment she tried to save her husband and instead sent him away with only his final, merciful words. The evening air in the village was heavy with the scent of wet earth after a brief afternoon rain. Inside their small clay-walled home, Halima knelt beside her husband Umar, who lay curled on the woven mat, his body trembling under a faded blanket. His fever had risen sharply since morning, and every cough seemed to shake him to his bones. Halima's heart raced. The healer had given her a pouch of reddish medicinal powder the day before, instructing her to brew it into tea twice a day. But as she checked Umar's burning forehead, fear gnawed at her. Whatever they had tried so far wasn't working. She rose quickly, pulling down the wooden box where her late grandmother's remedies were stored. Inside lay dried leaves wrapped in cloth, bottles of cloudy liquids, and a bundle of green herbs she remembered seeing in childhood. Her grandmother used them for easing chest pains and fevers. She stared at the pouch from the healer and the bundle from the box. If both were good on their own, wouldn't they work faster together? Umar didn't have time to wait. In her hurry, she lit the small fire and set a clay pot of water to boil. She tossed in the green leaves first, then spooned in the reddish powder. The steam rose with an earthy bitterness mixed with something metallic, but Halima told herself medicine wasn't supposed to smell pleasant. When it was ready, she poured the mixture into a wooden cup and went to him. "Drink this," she urged, lifting his head gently. "It will help." Umar looked at her with tired eyes, managing a weak smile before sipping. He grimaced at the taste but swallowed until the cup was empty. Halima brushed the damp hair from his forehead, her heart easing just a little. But moments later he began to cough, a deep, choking sound. His breathing grew uneven, his chest rising too quickly then too slowly. "Umar? What's happening?" Halima's voice shook. He reached for her hand, his grip weak. His lips moved, but at first she couldn't hear. Leaning closer, she caught the words, soft, strained. "It's all right. I forgive you." Her throat tightened. "Forgive me? For what?" But deep inside she already knew. Her grandmother's warning came back like a thunderclap. Some herbs heal alone, but together they can kill. "No, no, stay with me," she begged, trying to lift him into her arms. But his eyes were already losing focus, his breath shallow and fading. By the time the healer arrived, the cup still sat beside him, a smear of reddish-green liquid at the bottom. The healer's expression told her everything. There was nothing to be done. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the thatched roof, while inside, Halima sat frozen beside her husband's still body, his last words echoing like a curse and a blessing she could never forget. The moon hung low over the village, casting silver light on the narrow dirt paths. Inside their small home, Safia sat at the table, her hands wrapped tightly around a clay cup. Across from her, Malik adjusted his worn leather sandals, preparing to leave for the evening meeting. He had asked her twice already, his brow furrowed in quiet suspicion. "You're certain it's safe?" She forced a reassuring smile. "It's just a small gathering of traders, nothing more. They want to discuss the new market rules. You'll be back before midnight." What she didn't tell him, what she had decided he didn't need to know, was that among those traders would be Idris, a man Malik had argued with only weeks ago. Idris had accused him of undercutting his prices, of stealing customers. Voices had been raised, threats had been muttered. Safia feared if she told Malik the truth, he would refuse to go. And they needed someone to speak for their family in the new trading arrangements. Malik's eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer, searching for doubt before he finally nodded. "All right. I'll go." She watched him leave, the faint sound of his footsteps fading into the night. The lie she told sat heavy in her chest, but she pushed it aside. She convinced herself it was harmless, just words to keep him calm. Hours later, Safia was still awake, pacing. The night was too quiet, the wind whispering through the grass like it carried secrets. She lit a small lantern and stepped outside, her eyes scanning the path. Then she heard it, hurried footsteps, uneven breathing. Malik staggered into view, clutching his side. The flickering lantern light revealed the dark stain spreading across his tunic. Malik! She ran to him, dropping to her knees as he collapsed into her arms. His face was pale, his breath ragged. They were waiting. Idris? His words broke off into a cough that sent warm blood against her hands. Tears blurred her vision. I'm so sorry I didn't. He shook his head slightly, his lips curling into the faintest smile. It's all right. I forgive you. Her heart shattered. No, please, don't say that. But his eyes were already dimming, his body going limp against her. The lantern's flames swayed in the wind, casting shadows on the empty road he had walked only hours earlier, full of life. Safia sat there until the night began to fade, the weight of her lie pressing down like the earth itself. From that night on, the road to the meeting place became a ghost in her memory, a path paved not with dirt, but with the echo of his last words and the truth she wished she had told. The dawn sky over the river was painted in shades of soft pink and gold when Aisha stepped out of the hut, stretching against the cool breeze. The air carried the scent of wet reeds and the distant call of herons. Her husband, Hamid, was already at the shore, preparing his small wooden boat for the morning's fishing trip. Aisha, he called, smiling as he tightened the strap of his basket. Bring me the rope from beside the hut. She found it coiled neatly by the doorway, still damp from yesterday's rain. She handed it to him quickly, distracted by thoughts of the errands she needed to run that day, fetching water, washing clothes, grinding millet for the evening meal. Hamid looped it around the dock post, humming as he adjusted the nets. The tide was calm, the river glassy under the waking sun. Aisha told herself she would double-check the knot later, once she came back from the well. But she didn't. The day passed in the rhythm of chores, the sun climbing high before slipping behind a veil of gray clouds. By afternoon, a strange stillness settled over the village, the kind that came before trouble. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something heavier, the storm smell that made the elders close their windows. By the time Aisha returned to the shore, the sky had turned an angry shade of charcoal. The river, once calm, now churned in restless waves. She scanned the horizon and saw Hamid's boat, a tiny speck, bobbing dangerously far from shore. Her heart leapt into her throat. She spotted the dock rope floating loose in the water, frayed at one end. The knot had never been secured. A sudden gust tore across the river, sending Hamid's cries faintly through the wind. She waded in up to her knees, screaming his name, but the storm was louder. Sheets of rain lashed her face and lightning split the sky, illuminating his figure for a brief, terrible second, struggling against the waves, fighting to turn the boat. She grabbed another rope and ran along the shore, trying to find a closer point, but the current was merciless. Hamid's voice came again, weaker this time, then drowned out entirely by the thunder. Minutes, or maybe hours, later, the boat drifted back toward the dock, empty except for the sodden nets. Aisha sank to her knees, clutching the wet rope in her hands. When the villagers found her, she could barely speak, only whispering through chattering teeth, "I should have checked. I should have tied it." They never recovered his body. But every time the wind carried the smell of an approaching storm, she heard it. His voice on the waves, soft and forgiving, words she had never truly deserved. The late afternoon sun poured its heat over the village, turning the dust on the road into a golden haze. Inside their small clay home, Layla sat by the window weaving a basket in tight, sharp motions. Her jaw was set, her mind replaying the argument she'd had with her husband, Samir, that morning. He had forgotten to bring home the flour she needed, again. Words had been exchanged, sharp, louder than either of them intended. When he left for work at the far edge of the fields, she had told herself she wouldn't speak to him until he apologized. The first call came just after midday. The old cell phone on the table buzzed against the wood, Samir's name glowing on the tiny screen. Layla's hand hovered for a second, but her pride was quicker. She turned the phone face down. It rang again. And again. Each time, her heart gave a small, reluctant thud, but she told herself it could wait until he got home. If he wanted to talk, he could do it face to face. By late afternoon, the calls had stopped. A strange unease began to creep in, like the shadow of a cloud across the ground. It was nearly sunset when someone banged on her door. Breathless, their neighbor Musa stood there. "Layla, come quickly. Samir's hurt." The world tilted. She followed Musa down the dusty path, her sandals slipping. They reached the edge of the field where a small crowd had gathered. Samir lay on the ground, his clothes torn and stained with blood. A broken ladder lay nearby, a basket of harvested maize scattered across the dirt. She dropped to her knees beside him, her voice breaking. "Samir. I'm here." His eyes fluttered open and for a moment relief crossed his face. I called you," he whispered, each word labored. "I needed you." Hot tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "It's all right. I forgive you." Then his chest stilled beneath her hands. The murmurs of the onlookers faded into silence. Layla sat there long after the others left, the phone still in her pocket, heavy as a stone. When she finally looked, she saw all the missed calls, every single plea she had ignored, glowing in cold, unfeeling numbers. From that day on, the sound of a ringing phone was no longer just a sound to her. It was the echo of his voice, calling from somewhere she could never reach again. The night was quiet except for the soft hum of crickets. She sat inside, wrapped in a blanket, lost in her thoughts as the wind rattled the windows. Far across the valley, faint lights began to flicker against the darkness, blinking in a strange rhythm. She noticed them for a moment, thinking it was just a faulty street lamp or maybe kids playing with torches. It didn't cross her mind that the light was deliberate, desperate, and meant for her. He was out there, somewhere beyond the hill, the cold seeping into his bones, his hands trembling as he pressed the small flashlight's button again and again. The rhythm was uneven now, weaker, but still carrying the silent plea, "Help me." Inside, she busied herself making tea, telling herself she'd ask about it tomorrow. When she finally decided to step outside, the wind had grown sharper. She pulled on her coat, curiosity tugging at her, and began to walk toward where she'd seen the flicker earlier. The path was darker than she expected, and the ground felt heavy beneath her feet. As she reached the clearing, there was no light. Only silence and the cold outline of something lying motionless on the ground. Her heart dropped. She knelt beside him, shaking his shoulder, but there was no response. The flashlight lay inches away, its battery dead, its final flicker long gone. She had missed the signal, and now she had missed the chance to save him. She had always been the keeper of his secrets, the one person he believed would never turn his words into weapons. When he spoke to her, it was with an open heart, about his struggles, his fears, and the delicate matters that kept him awake at night. He trusted her because she had promised to stand by him, no matter what storms came. But trust can be fragile, and sometimes it breaks in ways you never see coming. One evening, while sitting under the dim light of their veranda, she found herself in the company of someone she thought was a friend. The conversation began innocently enough, weaving through everyday matters before slipping toward the truths he had shared with her in confidence. She told herself it wasn't harmful to mention a few details, but words have a way of traveling far, and once spoken, they cannot be called back. The person she confided in listened carefully, asking just the right questions to draw more from her than she intended to give. She didn't notice the spark in their eyes, the subtle tightening of their smile, a signal that the information was not being received as a harmless story, but as ammunition. Days later, the consequences arrived. He came home with a face drained of color, holding a letter that spelled out the damage. Someone had used his private vulnerabilities against him, twisting them into accusations, and spreading them where they would cause the most pain. When he looked at her, it wasn't anger she saw, it was disbelief. She tried to explain, to insist she had never meant for this to happen, but intent mattered little when the harm was already done. In that moment, she realized that trust, once broken, cannot be glued back together with apologies. It becomes something else entirely, a reminder, a scar, a shadow between two people who once believed in each other without hesitation.